Today I thought I'd show you how I load my Lucy. And the best part about having a long arm is the basting process or the layering process, making your quilt sandwich, because it's so much easier. You don't have to get on the floor on your hands and knees. You don't have to set up a whole bunch of tables if you can't get down on the floor. Yeah, you don't have to use spray basting. You don't have to use pins. All you have to do is load it into the bars that are here, the roller bars, and away you go. So right now I have on Lucy, I have my backing fabric for the latest quilt that I'm going to quilt on here. And how long does this take in total? Well, probably takes you, about a half hour with it. When I first got the Lucy, it took me a lot longer than that, but it was still worth it. But now I'm pretty much got it down pat. So you can see here I have my fabric wrong side up, and it is now on these rollers. I didn't show you the process, and it's rolled underneath here. And if you look under here, you'll see something that looks a little red. Those are the red snappers, which are plastic things that go across your rollers down here. There is a piece of doweling in these that we sewed into them, and they didn't come with that because there's about 3 different ways that you can put your quilt on a long arm. I use the floating method, which basically means the only layer that is secured to the bars is the backing fabric. And right now, and the red snappers help keep it that way. And now I have it taut here, and I have dials on this side, and I have a motor on my Lucy, which allows me to advance the quilt or put it back, which is really a nice feature. It's an option, but when you're spending this kind of money on a long arm, you might as well go for the whole ball of wax, right? So I have my backing on here. It's all smoothed out. Now, if this was terribly wrinkled, I probably would have ironed it first, but in this case, no. And these little folds that are in here are stretched out. They will not cause me any problem whatsoever. So now I've got to put my batting on, so I'll show you what that looks like. Now, one of the things that I do dislike about getting the quilt set up is finding a piece of batting that is big enough, because you want a piece that is going to be bigger than your quilt, of course, because there's going to be some shrinkage. And I usually like to leave a good 8 inches on either side of my quilt for that. I do the same thing with the backing fabric, but I have these big bags here. These are scraps of batting, and anytime you're looking for batting a certain size that you think a scrap will work on, you never find the right size. But I don't really want to dig into my big rolls right now, and luck would have it, I did find a piece that will be wide enough and long enough for this particular quilt. This is not a large quilt. It only measures probably about 42 inches by 42 inches, something like that. So I'm going to mount this. Now, this is where the floating comes in. So I'll show you what that is after I put this on. Well, essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the batting up, and I'm going to lay it on top of my backing fabric. And then I'm going to put the quilt top on top of that. And then, well, I'll show you how you secure it. So my batting is laid out just on top of my quilt backing, and you notice it's not quite as wide as my backing fabric. A little bit of an edge here, but that's okay. This will be fine because I've overcompensated here for all of this, and so yeah, that'll work. But I haven't secured it, and you'll notice it's just hanging over the top of the rollers at the moment. It will have to go under this roller, but you'll see how to do that in a minute. But next thing is, I've got my quilt top over here. I'm going to lay it on top of this. Now I'm going to leave about 4 inches or so from the top of my batting here to the top of the quilt. And that's to compensate for the way that my quilt path sets itself up for this. So I'll be back. So I've laid the quilt top on top of the batting. Nothing has been basted yet. It's just laying on top of it. I'm just getting it centered as best I can between my 2 edges of my batting and my backing. And I'm leaving here about 4 inches at the top as well. So that'll give me lots of space for the needle to do a partial ghost row off the quilt when I set that up for quilting. So now what I have to do is I'm going to roll basically I'm going to take this and I'm just going to roll it, which is very awkward to do when you only have one hand. And I'm rolling it up towards the top bar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this over the top bar and I'm going to tuck it back under and roll it back out and sort of straighten it as well. So here I have tucked it just underneath that top roller bar, which is a bar I never use. That's another method for securing your quilt, which by recommendation by Tracy Russell, she says this is a faster method and works just as effectively. We're calling it floating. So now what I want to do is I just want to push this under that roller. Again, a little awkward when I'm only using one hand. And then I'm just going to unroll the batting and the quilt top back to where it was before. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to straighten it all up. I'm going to smooth out any kind of bumps or bulges or wrinkles. And then I'm going to bring my needle over. I'm going to get it lined up so that I have about 1/8 of an inch from the needle center all along this edge. So that means I'm going to drag it across without turning on the power and just pull this top of the quilt to get it fairly straight. Now to do that, I'm going to put on the horizontal channel lock because that'll keep it from moving up and down, and it'll go across and I can use that as my guide to see if it's straight. I am not doing any stitching whatsoever at this point in time. The other thing that I forgot to mention to you is that I need to put these clamps on the edges just before I do the initial straightening of the top of the quilt. And that just keeps, there's 2 of them at this end, there's 2 of them at this end, and this just keeps everything nice and taut horizontally as well. So I've lined up the center of my needle about 1/8 of an inch from the top of the quilt top, right there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around to the side of the machine, and down here you can see this little knob, and that's a channel lock. So I'm just going to, oops, I moved it. Okay, I'm all right. All right. Back here, try to get this in focus. There it is. And I'm just tightening this up enough so that this whole piece, okay, why am I going forward? Not really sure, be back. You know, it really helps if you turn the knob the right way. Okay, my channel lock is now secure, so you can see I can move it this way, but I cannot bring it forward or back. So that's what I'm going to use as my guide, and I'm going to just run it all the way down here and adjust the quilt by just giving it a little pull so that I have about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from the top of the quilt, and that's going to be my basting line. This just helps to keep everything as straight as you possibly can keep it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is actually do a basting line across it, but just before I do that, I need to pick the color that I want in my bobbin and in my top thread, so I'll be back. So I've decided that I'm going to use a really dark navy thread on my quilt top. Yes, it's going to show up very well on the black, and it will show up on these lighter colors as well. In the border, it will show up too. I'm being very bold on this quilt because you can see this is really a lot of negative space here because I just used batiks. And underneath, I'm using this more of a tealy color as well because my background fabric, which I didn't really show you, and I don't know if I can probably give you a little peek right here. That's what my background fabric looks like. So, or my backing fabric. So those are the colors that I've picked. I'm going to thread my needle, I'm going to get my bobbin in place, and then I'm going to baste. Okay, so I've taken my channel lock off and I'm ready to baste my quilt. Now, so I don't have to worry so much about pulling up the thread in the quilt, I'll do it off to the side on the batting, and I'm just going to run a line very close to the edge of the quilt, about 1/8 of an inch, no more than 1/4 of an inch, all the way up, across, and I'll adjust the quilt as I go to make sure that it's as straight as I can get it, and down this side. And that's basting the quilt. Now, as time goes by, as I roll the quilt ahead, I have to continue basting down the sides, but the top will be done. And this should keep things all very nice and straight. I'll show you what that looks like when I come back. Okay, I don't know if you can see it or not, but my quilt is all basted now along the sides, at least for this part of it, and all the way along the top. And I've got it close enough to the edge that I will lose some of that basting line will be cut out when I square up the quilt just before I get ready to put on the binding. So that'll be gone. Yes, I do lose a little bit from my border, but you should always plan your borders as such, because you are going to lose a little bit when you square up the quilt. So that'll be fine. So I've got everything nicely smoothed out, as you can see right here. Should be good. Now I can set up the quilt path, this thing, and start my quilting, and that's a video for a different day.